Hi, folks. Cathy Shooter. I will be demonstrating a couple of, I guess, mini demonstrations. One of them will be on how I do color, and I will be using my macaw parrot that I started a while ago that has been posted on WetCanvas as it is. Haven't worked on it since then. I'll do a little demonstration on feathers as well, since it's an incomplete board and it's conveniently feathers. And then I will also had some inquiries about how I do horse manes, and in particular like the longer hair like a mane or something, so I will do a demonstration on my horse's mane as well. And happy to take questions and answers and whatever. For me, when I do color, I'm not real consistent on how I do every board. It all depends on how vibrant I want the colors. I tend to use for something like a macaw, my ink's a lot more concentrated than something where I want the colors to be more neutral and faded out, so I would dilute it a lot more with water. These are just little containers. You can get them at various craft stores, or this whole set with the lids and I think 12 containers was $3 at Hobby Lobby. However, they are not completely waterproof, so if you're transporting them on an airplane, make sure you have it inside a Ziploc bag. I primarily do use the ampersand ink still. I have purchased at various times different inks. However, I still tend to go back to the ampersands. However, we all know that we don't love the red on the ampersand. Maybe with you, she love it? Okay.
I don't love it, but I don't.
I actually normally have a little syringe that I use for diluting, and I just keep it full of water so that I can dilute things out. However, I didn't make it into my kit today, so I will not be using it. Actually.
I got one in my kit.
I have one of my furs.
Why do you have one in your purse?
I wasn't going to say that. Another essential tool I was just talking to Susan about I keep in my kit is a safety pin, because I do find that the tips get clogged on our ampersand inks pretty easily, and it helps keep them. I have some that are just filled with water, so I can do it. And I tend to keep a variety of different shapes of paintbrushes inside of my kit, depending on what I'm doing. And when I colored the big mountain lion, I was covering such a large space, and I started to look at even like this type of brush, and I'm like, that's going to be about 3 years worth of painting. And I actually just used a paper towel and dumped it directly into my ink container and did it with a paper towel. And it was a fairly diluted ink because I wanted the more neutral colors on it. I mix colors pretty much by trial and error. I don't know other people. I know Harold keeps stuff written with little formulas and stuff, but I'm not that fancy.
Yes, ma'am.
I pretty much like, oh, let's try a drop of this, and I try it on a piece of paper, and not the right color, then. And sometimes I'll actually use like a blank one and be like, well, I'm not getting even close, so let's go. Sometimes if I know I'm not going to need like a whole drop, I'll put it on a paintbrush and partially dab it off and then put it into my ink. This is a very scientific technique. Never to be replicated. And actually,
What ratio of water to ink do you normally?
it actually ranges quite a bit, as I was saying. If I want a kind of more of a subtle tech tone, I use it quite diluted with water. And if I'm going to do something where I really want it to be pretty vibrant, like a macaw's feathers, where I don't want it to be really faded out, I don't use the ink straight out of the bottle, but it can easily be 70% ink and 30% water. However, I do still kind of work in layers, and if I'm doing something that is a fairly concentrated ink, I do find that you can see it on the black ink as well, so you have to be a little bit more careful about like going over your edges and that kind of thing. As most of us already know, like when you're coloring, you typically need to over scratch from how you would as a black and white, because the black and how your eye sees it with the color will make it kind of look muddy, so you need to take it more white than you would if you were just going to do it as a black and white. In this photo right here, if I could converted it to a black and white image, it would have very little value difference. The yellow is actually almost as dark of a value as the blue is, but obviously the color in a macaw parrot is what distinguishes it more than the value. So even on my piece, you can see that really this value is not so different than this value, even though our eye sees blue as a darker color than yellow. Value-wise, they're actually very similar.
Have you wiped that off or brushed it with a stiffer brush to get that?
Well, this piece has traveled several places. Yeah, I do recommend doing that. I haven't specifically done that, but yeah, if you're working on a piece with scratching it and then going straight to your ink, you do want to make sure you dust off that black ink, or it will start to mix in there.
Do you usually complete a black and white piece before you start coloring it? Or do you,
It's a mix.
or you do it sometimes?
Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. And sometimes I'll, a lot of times, especially more faded colors, I will test it on a piece of paper before I ever go to doing it on my board, make sure that my color is pretty similar. I do find that typically paper is a pretty close representation of what it's going to look like on the board, though not 100% exact. And it's really exciting. You then paint it. This is actually a little more watery than I would normally work. A little less ink and a little bit more water than how I would normally work a piece like the Macon. So with that said, I'm going to add some more ink.
You brush with your strokes?
I guess.
This color is that color.
I guess to some degree I do kind of go with my stroke.
Do you have a specific reason you're starting in one place on a fender and not another?
Because it was in front of me.
Okay.
Do you find that if the black ink runs any into the, like the yellow, you get a, like graying?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had colors made money by black ink residue. So as we were saying, I do suggest like cleaning off your board, dusting it off with microfiber or paper towel or something, trying to get off as much of that black ink residue as you can.
What do you do if you did the black ink mixed in with it while you're painting? Do you try to get it, dial it off, or?
It depends how much it was. Overall, not too much. I don't worry about it too much. I'm not very precise when it comes to color, even though people think I am. And obviously, the more layers you put on there, the darker it's going to be.
Would you normally hold your hand like that?
I'm sort of trying to show it to the camera, but I do work with smaller boards in particular. I do work them in my hand quite a bit.
Okay.
And I will sometimes blot it if I'm getting sort of a run line. And a lot of times after you color a particular thing, it's going to be a little bit too dark. I actually find that the ampersand inks kind of have an iridescent sheen a little bit, that if you kind of do it, you'll see a little bit of reflectiveness. And of course, as is the nature of Scratchboard, you ink and then you scratch. And in particular, I may not scratch necessarily really dark areas, but I'm going to go back and re-scratch those highlights.
You'll scratch right after you...
Once it's dry.
You ever use a hairdryer or anything like that? I mean,
I find it dries pretty quickly. I don't really find that to be necessary. As ampersand told us, if it feels cool, it's damp, and if it feels like normal room temperature, then it's dry. So even though it may feel dry, if it still feels cool, that's an indication that it's still damp.
I've noticed that sometimes if I scratch too soon,
It will take off more.
than you want.
Yeah, you'll get a big white chin because it seems like it softens that clay layer a little
Yeah.
bit. And I tend to work with a more concentrated layer on the bottom, and then as I'm going, I'll gradually work up to lighter and more diluted colors because I'm adding back in highlights typically rather than... This selection will get damaged. I don't think that follows or anything. That's kind of... Sometimes I try to work with the same color that I mean, like use a brown value inside of a brown tile, because otherwise sometimes you like think you have a brown and you go and dip in there and it's green. And it's not always a good deal.
I use white paper plate to mix some colors on.